Hey everybody, it's Tim and Mary here on Call Me Beast. Thank you so much for watching. And our guest tonight, Michael Gaines. Michael, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
I'm so glad that you're here. So everybody, we are looking forward to talking to Michael about all things drill writing, winter season stuff. And we have a cat that's already made an appearance. So it's going to be very interesting. And if you're watching and you have a question, type it in the comment section at any time. So, Michael, it's so great for you to take some time to talk with us tonight. I want to start with the first most important question, which is, how is Kayak doing?
Kayak is doing great. He's this is week 5 after his surgery. Kayak's my dog, for anyone who doesn't know, and he's just heard his name. It's 5 weeks since the surgery, and he's doing great. We were out right before this call. We did like about a 1.5 mile walk. He's using all four legs. So, yeah, thanks for the support. Really, everyone was so great to check in on him.
Yes, we've all been following along. Those of us that are following along on social media and making sure that he's doing okay. Seems to be doing great. I just thought I would start by asking that. And of course, everybody, if you're watching, I'm Tim Hinton, the beast of the marching arts, and Dr. Mary White is here. Mary, you are a marching person. You and I have worked together for eons, it seems like. And you're a wonderful color guard technician.
Thank you. I'm happy to come technique for anybody. But it's great to meet you, Michael, and it's great that you're on here. There's probably 1,000 questions I can think of to ask you, but I promise we will not go into the way back machine.
You can try. I can't guarantee how way back my brain is, but
I think we're just interested in any memories that you might have about some of the things that we're curious about. And there's no right or wrong answers. You don't have to think of super details or anything. We just are excited to get to talk to you. So first thing I wanted to ask you is, how are things going right now? Like, if you could tell us, what groups are you working with right now in the winter? I'd be interested to hear about that.
Right now in the winter, they're all doing great. I have obviously like my main one that I've been with since 1997, Pride of Cincinnati. I know I can't believe it's been that long when I think about that. Wow. But they're doing great. They're doing great. I hope you get to see the show. We're all really proud of it.
On video, I've seen it. Well, video again.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Some sort of stream, I've seen it.
Yeah. That one's been a fun project because it was one of those where we've talked about for a while the idea of constricting space, and there's 36 people that perform in that, and I kind of wanted to do that to myself just as a challenge to we constrict the space into a circle on the floor and don't use the full arena, and so all 36 people are constantly in close proximity. So it's been a fun challenge, but I'm really proud of it. So hope you get to see it live at some point, or at least on video again.
It's not a challenge for the kids, though, is it? Like, they just probably loved it immediately, right?
I think, I think it's probably twofold. I think they loved it immediately, but also then realized, oh, we're really close to each other this entire show. You got to have the safety protocols in place, and there's always something flying around, and so there were a lot of discussions early on about the inherent risk in doing something like this with a constricted space, and so the conversations were had about safety protocols and rehearsal etiquette, etc.
Wow.
But
very interesting. Who else are you writing for or working with?
Yeah, in world class also Etude, who's their beautiful show, and same with UCF Pegasus.
Yeah.
I always get nervous about the alphabet soup in Florida is so confusing to me. Like, there's so many letter groups, and so I know I teach Pegasus, but I always get really nervous right before I say those 3 letters. I'm like, it's UCF. But I'm almost positive I got that right. Again, those two doing beautiful.
And there's like 3 or 4 or 10 Pegasus guards, so it could be
right. Exactly.
Reiner, right? I mean,
yeah. It's great when you see a program that's that healthy, that can produce so many groups.
Yeah, very cool. All right, good. So I before we start back into remember this show with this group and tell us, before we make you do all of that, I did sort of warn you a little bit. I'd love to hear if you have 2 or 3 things that I asked you, things that you wish that you had known when you started, right? So do you have, I know I sort of threw that at you at the last minute, but I wondered, when you think back on things that early in your career, things you wish you had known, I wondered if you had anything about that you'd like to share.
I was mad at you for that. That was a because I was thinking about it. It's like, that's a really tough question, because you think back and you're like, and you see how you learned along the way, and it probably all happened in the chronology that it should have happened in terms of just a knowledge base and your educational learning curve, really. So it's hard to say, I wish I would have known that one. I mean, I wish I would have known all of it, I suppose, when I started. But, one of the things that, as I think back to that time, I think one of the things I wish I would have known was that I was going to be okay. That you could have a career doing something like that. And I don't know if that's the kind of answer you were really looking for, but that was the one that really popped into my brain, because, as especially back then, not a lot of people were doing the full-time
You're right.
pageantry, especially, the drill design. And, I had a degree in business, finance, mostly because I chickened out on becoming a music ed major right before I went to college. I had the conversation with the parents. I'm like, I just don't know if I want to be a band director. I mean, and so I went into business because I wasn't sure what else to do at that point. But that didn't last very long. And, then I did go self-employed after, I'd say it was within 2 years of graduating college.
Wow.
And it was, I didn't know at that point that was my career. You know what I mean? I just knew that I was going to try this for a little bit. I was, well, whatever that would have been, 21, 22, about 23, maybe. So I wish I would have known back then that things were going to be okay for the long term. But I think part of it too is, I worked, and I'm proud of it. I worked really hard. And part of it was just to feel like it was a legitimate career. I wanted to prove that it could be as legitimate, because people always say, do you have a real job, to people who are self-employed? Yeah. And it used to drive me crazy, because I'm like, I think this is just as real as, sitting in a cubicle doing whatever it is you do. But I think part of it was really just the validation to myself as well as to others. I mean, I think there was that insecurity. And so I worked really, really hard from a young age. There wasn't a lot of that work-life balance at that point. And there wasn't as much people stressing the work-life balance. But I also really am grateful and lucky that my, I don't even know if you could call it a career at that point, my job was also what I loved to do. I was doing what I loved for work, and I would have been doing some of that anyway, as a hobby, even if I wasn't doing it as a career. But the amount of stress and anxiety that I had back then, about whether or not I was doing the right thing and not using my business degree, and would I be able to get back into it if this all didn't work out. I wish I would have known that it's all going to be okay.
And people probably questioned you, right? I mean, your parents may have said, may not be a good idea.
Yeah, my parents are great, because usually my mom still says to this day, every time I said, I need to talk to you, they automatically like, oh God, we got to sit down. But it was one of those where my parents were always, they would ask a lot of tough questions of me whenever I was trying to make a decision like that, and make sure I thought it through. And I appreciated that, although the time was frustrating. It's like, I know, but once the decision was made, I couldn't have had more supportive parents. They went along with me for the ride when I was like, hey, I want to start my own World Guard, and I'm 22 years old. How's that sound? And of course, hey, I'm not going to use that degree that you helped me pay for. I'm going to do band. So a lot of those tough conversations, but they were always there and supportive of me once the decision was made.
Well, and I'm one of those people that thinks that all knowledge is helpful and profitable, and is in the mix of all of it, right? So I think anything you learned at college, whether it was ended up where you ended up or not, is valuable and is in the mix of you doing great work. I do believe that. And
part of that, the insecurity led me to, actually is why I'm here in San Francisco, is I did go back to school in, I think it was about 27, 28, because I still had that, voice saying, what if this all doesn't work out? You've got a lot of years ahead of you that you need to take care of yourself. And so I went back to school, and I went to the art school in San Francisco and got a degree there. And that was when the whole web design, digital interface type work was coming on the scene. And I loved every minute of being in the art school. And I learned so much. I think maybe I've talked to you about this before, Tim, where I learned so much about what I didn't know, but also what I did know and just didn't know the names for it. Things that I felt like I developed as my own instinct for design. Then I go to art school and have to study design. I'm like, oh, there's a name for that. And that's a principle. And that's, and so it was just so overwhelmingly great when I did that. And while I didn't, there wasn't that off ramp into that industry, much to my department head's chagrin. I stayed with, I stayed doing what I love to do. But to your point, it all helped so much in every way. To everything I learned there, I was able to apply into the craft.
Of course, and nobody is going to say that Michael Gaines is not creating art. Okay, so I think that you can put that aside if anybody ever brings that up. And you are using everything you learned in that art school, no question about it. Okay, by the way, everybody, thank you so much for watching. We are going to be talking about specific shows and asking questions. If you have anything that you want us to ask Michael, please type it in the comments. So, Michael, anything else you came up with else that you wanted to share? If you wish you had known early on.
I think a lot of it is probably more, well, some of it, there's two sides of it. There's the design side, and then there's kind of the self-employed business side. Certainly a lot of, I feel like I was pretty good early on in the business aspect of it, and, making sure and I had mentors that gave me advice and all that. Steve Brubaker was one of my mentors, and he certainly, rang the warning bell about make sure you're having health insurance and make sure, but then I also have to give credit to my father, who would do financial advising as kind of a side gig. And so he also got me started really early in my 20s, investing in a retirement account, which I'm so eternally grateful for. And
Right.
Those of you out there who are in your 20s, and so there's a couple of people that got so annoyed with me because I won't name names, but young people in the activity, and I would just stay on them about, are you contributing to a retirement account? Are you contributing to a retirement account? Because they're in their 20s, and when you're in your 20s, like, well, I need beer money. I mean, that's basically what you do, or what I did. But yeah, even if it's $5 a month. Start.
Do without one latte a month.
What's that?
Do without one latte a month, and you got it.
It really is as simple as that, and the magic of compounding interest over decades is great. So yeah, youngsters out there, if I can sound like an old man, get your retirement account in order, make sure you have health insurance. And then also on the design side, one of the things that I went through, like everyone, and I don't know, it's one of those, do I wish I knew it back then? I guess it would have helped, but you kind of have to go through some of the stress points. And I was like everyone, once you start doing some good work that people enjoy, and you start getting other people curious about whether or not you can help them, and you start taking on more clients, or whatever you want to call them. That sounds so law firm, but you go through that phase where, where's the line? Where's too much? When is my work going to start suffering due to the volume? And so it's that balance of got to make a living, and you've got the voice. I want to validate my career, but also I want to do great work so that people think highly of me. And so it's that professionalism and want to make a living versus quality of work struggle that I think every young person, don't have to be a designer, technician, anything, and anyone who's self-employed will go through that stress point of what's too much, what's great, how much can I handle, and the work-life balance in that. In addition, when I started, I started out doing choreography. Had no desire to do, drill with all the instruments. That just seemed way too complicated. I was like, just give me a flag, rifle, saber, and a gym, and I'm good to go. But Yeah, so I did the choreography, and you know, like everyone who starts out, you know, you try to do way too much when you first start choreographing. And, you know, got to learn to settle in, find your voice, and also make sure the performers can achieve first and foremost. So that's definitely something that I went through that would have been nice to have known ahead of time, but it's also one of those that I think you have to learn for yourself.
Yeah, you know, we could sit here and talk for the next 45 minutes about how horrible drill writers are at at not taking on too many clients. Like drill writers are notorious for trying to do too much and then being late and like the whole thing that I don't want to get into, but you know who you are out there. But I feel like the concept of doing great work for fewer people, I wish more people could trust themselves to do that, Michael, because I think drill writers are so frantic to make money during the summer. And you know, these people that say they're writing 30 and 40 drills, and I'm just like, I could not begin to imagine how I would do that because it takes so much time for me to write one.
Fathom that number. I mean, unless each drill is, you know, 5 pages, or if it's, you know, I can't imagine that amount. But you know, to each their own. You know what you can handle, and what people are willing, and you know, at the end of the year or the beginning of the next year, if you have a high return rate, you know you're doing good work, and you know people trust you. If you're having the constant turnover, you know, there's some things to look in the mirror about.
Okay, so you mentioned, I think that all young designers, instructors, whatever, they try to do every idea right away, right? They try to put every idea into that first show. So you start Escapade, and it's so wildly successful. How did you not do that? You know what I mean? Like they were such great shows, so smartly put together. I mean, I know you're Michael Gang, so you had more going on than most people, but still, how did you not mess that up at the beginning and try to do too much?
I think it helped that I had rock star performers, you know, who also happened to be my best friends. You know, at that point, the age difference between me and the guard was, you know,
No.
1 or 2 years. You know, and it helped. And I had, no, I guess I don't. I had been writing shows for two years before that, but I also had the advantage of having performed at, you know, great places and been able to watch great designers. And so, you know, I had my marching years plus a couple years of ideas building up. And then I just got lucky that I had great friends who were great performers that could, for the most part, do that. And, you know, gradually throughout Escapade, when I started doing it, I was writing, you know, 99% of everything, the staging, the equipment work, choreography, movement, all of it. And one of the things I learned really quickly, I think, in my career was to not try to do it all on your own. You know, even if you can, it's not a great idea. You know, just for so many reasons. One of which I was also the director and having to do candy bar inventory, et cetera. Certainly don't want to discount all the people that helped me. You know, there was a ton of people, but the buck definitely stopped with me on all of that. But I don't know if I'm answering your question. I think, you know, part of it is probably luck. Part of it was just passion. Part of it was obsession. I was obsessed with everything in the activity. I would, you know, watch videos sun up to sundown with anyone who would watch with me, and then, you know, go to rehearsal, make a video, and take it home and watch more of it, and, you know, just live and breathe it, and not just my own groups, you know, just take in everything that I could to learn and bother people asking questions, you know, being or what I felt I was bothering them, but I know now that that's not bothering people, and I definitely. One of the first things I tell people who start asking me questions, who are apologizing, oh, I don't mean to bother you. I'm like, I can tell you're going to be great at this because you're doing this, because you're seeking out the information, you know? So, you know, anyone out there who's starting out or who have questions, you know, go up to people and introduce yourself, ask questions. That's how you learn.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. I love that, Mary, because I think people are afraid to ask, especially somebody that's sort of at a really high level and you don't want to bother them, whatever, but like, be bold and ask.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's no other way to learn. How else are you going to learn? I mean, there's not a textbook like you did. You watched those videos 1,000 times. and you can, I'm not saying this out of turn, but you totally can see that love, that passion, that obsession at the Escapade Doors flag feature. I totally can see it. Like, I totally can see the genius of it. And like, they're still showing it, right? They're still showing it in promos.
Oh, are they really? I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that, Mary. Let's describe exactly what you're talking about, Mary.
It's just, it's geometry, and it's fluid, and it's motion, and it's color, and it's like adding on and building on, and it is just comes together in this flurry of incredible music that people really recognize and love, and it is Michael can make it better, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I actually really love that show, and one of the things that I was most disappointed is that was one of the first shows that you couldn't put online because the Jim Morrison estate was pretty strict about the music. But yeah, I think that was the year that Escapade. It was interesting because I was going to say came into our own, but I think more competitively because I feel like we had a pretty strong brand from the beginning.
Totally.
Between the first year and then the End of the World, which will always be one of my favorite. Yeah, and then I think the Doors was a big step up for me as well as all of my collaborators, just competitively. I think we took a step, and I think that was the first year. I know that was the first year that we medaled, I believe.
Wasn't it kind of? I thought it was very innovative at the time. Like, we were blown away by that. I mean, I was still very involved in color guard, Scholastic World Guards and stuff, and we were just in awe of it. I mean, that was really the pinnacle of the all flag feature that was just so monumentous, I think.
Yeah. I'm trying to think back to when we put the all flag feature. In fact, I think that was where also that I extended the break on through music to keep it going. So you kept your
I don't
break.
Don't make me sit.
I think part of that was, you're right. Part of it was dealing with rock music and the tempos that were inherent, but then also there were really short visual phrases and interweaving. So that helped that. And then, as you were saying, adding on the volume of flags and really just pacing it out where we extended the music to really like push the culmination off and really build that tension before. And then, obviously just things started flying everywhere.
Punctuation, like you said, the punctuation in the rock music, it was really quite innovative, I thought of, obviously. I mean, you'll talk about it. How many years ago was that? 1,000? It was
a choice because obviously all the context of the Doors and their I don't know what you want to call it, rumored lifestyle, etc. So the had to deal with that a little bit. But I think the biggest thing was just the first 2 years of Escapade. We did rock music, and I was starting to realize the limitations of that competitively, at least for where I was at that point. And so the Doors actually gave us a lot more depth in the soundtrack from beginning to end through which to create, as opposed to, maybe the year or two before that where we, there was variety, but there was also a lot of drum beats on 2 and 4.
Yeah.
So.
I love this conversation of how that music, like, it's totally synergistic, the music and the equipment and the movement. I mean, it's like, it's inseparable, right? I mean,
but this is what we're all trying to do, Mary, right? I mean, like, the thing is, when it really happens, because there's tons of times in the Cavaliers shows that I'm going to bring up in just a minute. By the way, if you're watching, everybody, you have questions, type those in. I'm going to ask you some questions about some Cavaliers shows. But when everything is right, and the music and the visual and all, this is what we love, right? So it must be exciting, Michael, when people respond like that.
Oh, it's the best. It's the absolute best. And I think, Escapade, I think I would have cried if we didn't get a standing ovation. I mean, that was what we were all about. We that was what all the members, all the staff, that was what we craved. That's what we thrived upon. And figuring out the way to have the crowd come with us on. It was only out for 4 years, but to have the audience come with us on the journey of everyone seemed to love the Guard. Now, how can we get more competitive and still keep that part? That was the challenge that I think that we were fairly successful in.
So we have a question from Bradley, who's watching. Hey guys, thank you for being here. If you have any questions, keep typing those in. This is a good question about what we're talking about. I'd love to hear thoughts about how to balance staging multiple layers and events while still keeping the visual focus clear. That's a great question.
It's a great question. Do you know, I guess it doesn't matter. I was going to ask which activity we're talking about.
I'm assuming because we're talking about Winter Guard, that's what we're talking about. But I don't know if you want to answer that for.
Yeah, so I think the same answer can apply, just in maybe a little bit different lens. But I think so. Multiple layers. You want to have a clarity about what your emphasis is, what your priority is, and how to create that hierarchy. So it's okay to have multiple things happening. The trick is not to confuse the viewer in terms of where am I a lot of times you get into that side to side thing where I'm not quite sure. One really good, method is to just, if you're going to have two different things happening at the same time, if you can create them where they're in the same line of sight, so they're complementing each other, so that, so I'm not having to do this, but I can actually take in both of them in the same line of sight. They don't have to be right in front or back of each other, but I don't have to be looking all over, and I can take both of them in and see how they complement each other and how they all work towards unity of composition, if you will. There's also, just in terms of the principles of design and ways to create that hierarchy. If let's say you have 3 events going on, and one of them is your emphasis, but you want them all to be happening, you could use anything from, you could use speed. Maybe the 2 that are not the priority, maybe they're moving at a slower speed, and the one that you really want people to focus on or to be the priority moves at a faster speed. So you can use contrast in that way, in a similar way. And that's why I was asking about the activity. If it's indoors, you can also use verticality to create some of those multiple events as well. And I think it's really about the contrast between them, as well as the geography and how you're taking them in as the viewer. It usually is, if you're getting like a, what judges like to call it, split focus. If you're getting those kind of comments, 9 times out of 10, I would bet that it's things that are happening a little bit too far apart from each other at the same time, and no clear answer as to where you want the viewer to look. We could probably spend a whole hour on this, and I'd be happy to. But I don't know if that answered. Who was that? Was that Bradley?
Yeah, that was Bradley. That's a really good question. Yeah, I think that's a great answer, and I appreciate you explaining it that way, because that's one of the things that's very frustrating to me. Is I feel like the activity is getting more and more things happening simultaneously, especially with with amplification. They don't even have to be in the obvious place to look, or that's all. That can be really frustrating to me. And I always appreciate when the visual designer has helped me, taken me through that journey of where to look and how to do it. And you just described a great way to do that.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, go ahead, Mary.
No. I was saying that I think that is especially true in the color guard world, Tim, where, the person just caught the rifle with their teeth and I missed it.
Yeah, it's very frustrating.
Yeah, it's difficult. And especially, the more complex you get with any show, whether it's winter or, marching band in the fall or drum corps. I at this point, I adore, how do I put it this way? I adore being able to create clarity out of complexity, if that makes sense. I get bored as a designer if things are just too obvious and simple. But at the same time, and I love complexity. I love layers. It's what keeps me interested, to keep designing, to keep pushing myself. Like I was talking about earlier with the Pride of Cincinnati thing. I kept saying to the staff, and they of course already knew that. I was like, don't underestimate how difficult this is going to be. But at the same time, that's what makes us make those decisions, is if we're a little bit scared of it. We're like, this could be something great if we're a little bit scared of it. But yeah, so taking those complexities and creating not simplicity but clarity out of complexity is a really fun challenge for me. Sometimes much to the chagrin of people choreographing when they're like, okay, there's only 27 parts in this 30 counts, but it makes for a more interesting thing, more interesting possibilities, I suppose.
And I love that you just described, I love when I'm talking with a super talented, successful designer and they mention how they give themselves challenges, right? And you sort of create certain limitations for yourself or certain challenges that make it exciting and interesting. And now let's have a problem solved. And sometimes I wonder when you have the perfect group in front of you and you can do anything, that must be really intimidating. So you've sort of answered part of that is, okay, well, I'm going to give myself a limitation to work with, right? Because maybe the group itself can do anything you can imagine. So that to me would be intimidating.
It can be. I don't know how many times I've seen the new cast of this year for whatever group and been like, they're really good. So if we're not, this is on me, or this is on us, or that kind of a thing. But in general, I think it's a good exercise for any designer. If you're finding yourself like, okay, we're starting another show, just give yourself a rule. No one has to know about it. No one has to know about it, except just use it for design inspiration. Maybe someone will pick up on it. Maybe someone else who practices the craft will pick up on it. But it's not something that you expect the world to understand. It's just something that if I'm a painter, I'm just going to use different blues in my palette. I'm just going to restrict myself to blues and let's see how this goes. And, just to give yourself those rules. And I think that keeps the passion for creativity alive.
I love it. So everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you have questions, please type those in. I don't know if we're going to get to all of them, but I appreciate that they're there. And if you are watching on the Marching Roundtable YouTube channel or the new Call Me Beast YouTube channel, I hope that you will subscribe and support all that we're trying to do. So Michael, I invited a good friend of mine, Jonathan Hall, to be here tonight. So Jonathan is a great drill designer. And I thought it would be great to have a drill designer come on, have his voice, and be able to ask you questions. So Jonathan, say hello to Michael.
Michael, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Man, it's an honor to be in your presence. I'll tell you right now, it's a huge fan of what you do, and I am. You are a huge influence.
Thank you very much. That means a lot.
One of the questions I want to ask you, I have a couple, but one of the ones I wanted to ask you is one of my favorite memories of your work. Obviously, dates back to the Cavalier days, but in particular, there was this scene in the DCI did a behind the scenes with the Cavies design team. And famously, this is where Brett Kuhn is playfully joisting you about Michael needs more counts. Michael needs more counts, right? He's had the music for 3 months, but he needs more counts. And I thought that's really funny because as drill designers, that sort of gets plastered on us, right? All the time we do more stuff. So, but the question I wanted to ask you would be specifically, how much do you see yourself? And I know it's probably changed over the course of the years as activity has morphed, but how much do you interject yourself ahead of time, maybe even before the music is being composed or being arranged, to say, hey, this event or these visual considerations that we're talking about, we're going to need X amount of counts or a ballpark so that the music can be written to avoid or mitigate some of those, hey, I need more count concerns as you begin to write the drill?
Well, I think first of all, every time I see Brett Kuhn, I remind him that he said that on a national broadcast on ESPN2, and I don't let him forget it. But to answer your question, and really every question that I would answer when it comes to design is going to start with the two words, it depends.
It depends, yeah.
It depends. So as not satisfying as that is, I have to start there. But, with regard to, let's say, when I was doing the Cavalier things, if I had, I don't know that it depends. I don't know that I had specific ideas that I needed to have ahead of time, but certainly there were many times where I would have the idea, like I'd see the music or hear the music and see the score and start playing around with it and come up with something that I thought was kind of cool, but would have been 10 times cooler if I just had a little more time counts, whatever the case may be. But then there were also times where, the music was just left blank for me to try something, and then, put the score to the film on later in different kinds of effects. So I find myself these days participating in the creative conversations about the feel of things and what could happen. I do a lot less of we have to get someplace these days. I think I did a lot more of that when I was starting out, where I would have an idea. This has to be a power wedge right here. So everything that I'm doing for the minute leading up to it is all about getting to that moment. And over the years, I realized that was great because I love that moment. But all of that, there could have been so much more, I guess, frequency of effects, etc., if I hadn't been trying to get somewhere, but rather writing in the moment and seeing where it would lead me. But I do think that some of that comes with experience as well. You know what you can do from here versus if you're in a different spot. So when it comes to brainstorming, and I'll have this conversation a lot with people I work with if they're asking me this part of the music. I mean, what do you see here? I start with it depends. And also, I'm not sure because I'm not sure where we just came from because it hasn't been written yet. So, this is the feel, this is what it could be. These days I try to live kind of more in the moment. Of course, knowing what's coming up, where the instruments have to be staged, all disclaimers apply about performers being able to achieve what's happening musically. But when it comes to the ideas, I feel like I've collaborated with my musical counterparts over the years in all of those different ways, where they would write to what I was doing or I would write to what they were doing, and then we would kind of meet halfway sometimes. So.
Is that the same with set design changes? So, for example, scene 1 and scene 2, like when I'm thinking about what you did with Vanguard in the 18th season, it's just you're moving all these platforms everywhere. Did you have a say maybe from the beginning of this is the scene we want to set, and then logistically to move these things in this manner, we're going to need X amount of counts? Was that communicated to the music arrangers prior, or was that also maybe worked synergistically at the same time?
It was, with that year, we had those props at, I guess it would have been end of April camp, maybe, or beginning of May. And we took them out on the football field and tried every single different configuration we could possibly do. And I would take photos and videos and how long does it take to do this? The whole staff was out there running up and down these things and just trying to figure all that out. So to answer your question, most of that was staged in the moment, as I just described, not ahead of time, with the sole exception. The only one I can think of is that day we knew what the ending set of the show was going to be. Yeah. That was the only, I'm trying to think through it. Yeah, I think that was the only preconceived, at this point in the show, the props are going to be here.
Did you have to work your way backwards then from there, or did you just kind of meet in the middle?
No, I started at the beginning. Oh, I guess we did know. We knew that the beginning was going to be compact also. So we knew the beginning set and we knew the ending set of the show. And in between, it was pretty much designing as we went and what needed to happen. And honestly, that show, for those listening, we were using these modular props that kind of nested, basically just cubes. And a lot of it had to do with who's not playing right now, who can move a prop, And so it wasn't easy because of the logistics of the musician, who's going to move them. You can't always rely on the color guard, and the cymbals hated me by the summer probably, but the music people that I was designing with were great about, I could say, hey, can I borrow 4 mellophones to move these 2 props for X amount of counts? And they would look at it and say, yes, no, maybe, or what we can do is change the music to this. So there was a constant collaboration going on, but in terms of the way I was designing at that point, it was pretty much through time as much.
So then you received the score and you made those instrumental decisions on who was going to move props based on the tacit of who's not playing it, or did you say, hey, I really need the mellophones to move here to here, can we make them tacit for this 8 bars or whatever, or was it maybe a combination of the two?
I think it was more the first one. We tried to stick with the music as it was written originally. Certainly, there were times that we had to ask for slight variation or to borrow some players or that kind of a thing. But it definitely is a back and forth collaboration. I work closely with Andy Toth on producing a lot of the moments in the show, and I know he likes to just create a spreadsheet to show who's playing where when, so you can identify the blank space, the white space, as we say in the score, to allow musicians to be able to contribute visually more so than they can if they're playing. And so all of that comes in. There's a lot of studying of things, but once I start writing, it is pretty go with the flow.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, that's really good. And then I just had one more, Tim, if I could just ask real quickly. I just think it's more of a philosophical question, just to pick your brain. With more groups, whether they're world groups in the indoor or world groups in the outdoor, and I know there are two different mediums, what trends in each of those, the indoor and the outdoor, excite you the most with what the activity is going over the next 5-10 years?
I think that when I came back into the drum corps activity, I had taken like five-ish years off after Cavaliers before Vanguard. And one of the things that I was excited about experimenting more with coming, into Vanguard was the I suppose the loosening of the traditional roles of I'm a brass player, so my movement's going to be very limited. I really enjoyed, and again, we had great performers. Most of the top drum corps do. But the advance in terms of what was being asked of the musicians, just from a choreographic standpoint, is amazing. I mean, it's incredible what these performers, especially the brass musicians, have to do in addition to their breath control, so they can play. It's pretty incredible that I would never have even dreamed of anything like where the drum corps are right now. Certainly when I marched. And you can see it happening over time, more and more of the choreography being implemented with the musicians. But it's just really exploded over the past, I don't know, decade, maybe less. So I think that excites me. I also like experimentation with staging options, and I alluded to it earlier where I enjoy figuring out the complexity of a lot of different things and bringing clarity out of that. And I think a lot of that, when I started writing for Vanguard, I know there were some people that wanted me to write in a similar way to what I did at Cavaliers. Mm-hmm. And I just wasn't interested in that because I felt like we'd already made that movie. And I thought we did it really well. And so, I definitely, during my time off, kind of reimagine, I suppose, an identity for how I write, where I can bring some of the excitement of what that was into this new era that allows for the performers to do so much more. Mm. Everyone's always going to have their favorite style or their favorite identity for design, and I know a lot of people love the drill era where things were flying around. But what I love about it is you can still do that. You can still do that. It's all how you put it all together. It's not, drill is not the only vehicle to get from point A to point B. Drill is not the only vehicle to create effect. Mm-hmm. It's all intertwined. And I think that the more variety you have, the better off you're going to be.
Okay, so you have just gotten to one of a lot of people are asking the same question. And so I'm going to ask it in my own way, everybody. I'll try to do my best. To that point you just made, Michael, nowadays there's a lot of non-traditional movement, shall we call it, in addition to drill. So you're saying, obviously, we can do both. But do you have any insights on how you make that decision? How much, when? Obviously, the music and the concept is going to speak to a lot of that. But I feel like a lot of people struggle. Like myself, I'm an old dog. I've been writing drills since, we were riding dinosaurs around a drum corps show. So how do you make that decision on when to do the non-traditional movement, and how to not make it just seem like, okay, now I'm going to get on my soapbox, but sometimes it just feels like everybody's just kind of running around and then they stop and play. And I'm like, that's not interesting to me. And your shows don't do that. So I'll stop talking.
Trying to figure out what the question was.
I know that was the most ridiculous. No, like, so how would you recommend someone? What's your thought process on when to incorporate the non-traditional movement, when to incorporate the drill, how to have the right balance for your show and your group, that kind of thing?
Okay, I would start with knowing the level of the performers first and foremost, knowing what their strengths and weaknesses are, because you will display the strengths and weaknesses in a different way to set performers up to look good. It could be drill, it could be not drill, it could be something choreographic. So you have to kind of know the performers that you're dealing with, because they have to be able to achieve. That's got to be your priority, especially people that are writing for high school and younger. Please don't overwrite. Don't bring the kind of the drum corps mentality into that high school arena unless you have superstars, right? Because the priority should, in my opinion, obviously your mileage may vary, but should always be the performers have to achieve, especially when they're in high school level. Also, if I'm writing for high schools, I like to know what in-town staff are like and what their abilities are. Can they produce moments in a more choreographic manner, a more production manner, or does a school not have that and they know how to clean drill? If that's the case, then I'll probably do a lot more of the drill. So a lot of it really depends on how the staff and the director of the different groups, how much they're comfortable with. So a lot of times there's a pattern that happens over the course of writing season for me anyway, where a school may get a third of the way through the show, or maybe even half, and then be like, okay, we're good on drill. we could use a few more moments to produce something, which is like, I think code for, okay, let's park for a little bit here, because we got our freshman kids that are just hanging in there. So that's part of it. Now, if you're talking about like on a level of like Vanguard or some of the top drum corps, I think that it really does come down to just like if you're writing the music, where you're trying to pace it out and you're trying to give different colors and different types of musical effects. It's the exact same thing. It's what have you done? What do you need to do to keep this interesting? Have you gone to this well too much? A lot of that. And that's where I think a lot of where drum corps kind of at now, certainly world-class color guard, but also drum corps where the staging, where drill has become an effect like any other effect, as opposed to a vehicle by which you transit this group from here to here. And so I think that by using it, and sometimes that makes the drill even more effective. Like if you've been doing theatrical staging for, X amount of time in your show, and all of a sudden you do some really exciting, what is traditionally called drill, that can make that drill that much more effective than if you had already been doing the same kind of traditional drill, 30 seconds before that. So I think a lot of it depends on a lot of different factors, but I would say that depending on the level of your group, variety is going to be your best friend, right? So don't be afraid to use any of these elements that are in your palette. Just be careful not to dip too much into any one of them.
I love it. So we have a lot of really good questions. There's a couple more I definitely want to try to get to. Everybody keep those questions coming, but we are nearing the end of this conversation. Michael, you're hitting home runs left and right. I'm so appreciative of you being here to do this. I'm loving this conversation, getting lots of comments about yay. By the way, somebody asked about Kayak. We talked about him at the very beginning. You can watch that on the recording, but he is right down there next to you, right, Michael?
He got up and left.
Oh, he did. Enough drill writing time.
Right. He's like, we're talking drill. I'm out of here.
So we do have a really interesting question from someone who says they are a horn person, and now they're writing for guard and they're having the same issue come up. And I think this is sort of going to speak to a number of people. How do you figure out how much to move them, how big their steps should be without knowing the complexity of the work that will be there? So even if you're going to work with the guard designer, up front. Still, do you have any like hard and fast rules or default rules on how much to move them, or how do you figure out how much to move them? Because apparently, I think this happens to a lot of drill riders is they don't do that right. They don't guess the right amount of space to give the guard or how much to move them, and it causes problems for them with their work. Do you have any
Sure.
big thoughts about that?
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a big topic, and I know that it can be a confounding one for someone who doesn't come from a color guard background. You know, traditionally, a lot of drill designers would come from, you know, brass, or, you know, they were a baritone player, or et cetera, et cetera. And so, but at that point, the guard was still kind of the relegated to the art behind the band. Whereas today, they're an integral part of the design. And so you know, the question about how to use them is a great one. It depends that on your performers, right? And what level we're talking. But regardless, if you're staging a color guard and, you know, they're all on flag, and I don't mean to insult your intelligence, but I'm just going to say it anyway, you need to give them a lot more space to work in. Now, if you have a experienced choreographer, you can create different environments that forces them to write in different ways, maybe in a more condensed space. But again, it goes to variety. You know, don't overdo any one thing. But if you're working with someone who really just wants to show off the color guard skills, you know, I would keep them a little more open. And also, the thing to think about is if you're a drill designer, you say you've got a block of color guard and you're moving across the field, and you're thinking, oh, that's going to be easy. That's, you know, an 8-5, 6-5 step size. You've got to keep in mind that color guards put choreography into those steps. It's not just left, right, left, right. Again, I don't want to insult anyone's intelligence here, but it's something to think about, where it's going to make the guard look a lot better if you can do things like they're all moving the same distance, they're all moving the same angle. Again, all disclaimers apply about, you know, texture, variety, et cetera. This is kind of on the surface. It's gonna make a guard look better the more you can keep them moving the same direction with the same step size, because you get into trouble when, like, if you're gating a line, the people on either end, if they have choreography, they're not going to be able to do it the same, and then it just starts looking a little fuzzy and kind of gross, you know. Or they just have to march, which is always an option. There are also people that believe that if you have a younger guard that's not that great at anything, you know, if they're all freshmen, there are some that ascribe to the belief that it's actually better to sometimes just keep them moving and do really simple, you know, call it flag work, whatever, just up and down. To keep them, what's that?
And achievable.
And achievable. Yeah. So, you know, there's two different philosophies. Some think that it's better just hold them as much as you can. Others think that it's actually easier to make them look good if they can just learn their drill and, you know, right shoulder to right slam kind of a thing. But if you really want to make a color guard segment look great, start with what I was just talking about, where same step size, same angle of movement, enough space, especially with flags. Slightly less with rifles and sabers, but you know, again, all disclaimers apply.
Okay, so I came in with a question that I'm going to indulge myself with, and then I have one more at the end. Then we're going to have to wrap this up. But Michael, first of all, my favorite all-time Cavaliers show is Frameworks, but I'm not going to ask you about Frameworks because we're running out of time. But there was a moment in the spin cycle show that I thought was so awesome, and I just want to ask you about it. And it was like I've had this in my head ever since you were so nice as to say, yes, I'll come on and talk to you, which I think is just awesome. So there was that moment in spin cycle where the horn line is seated, and then like they like stand up one at the time, and they're doing these. This was really fresh and new to me at the time. Like I was like, what the hell is this, and who could possibly think of this? So can you talk at all about where that idea came from and how you were able to choreograph that moment? Sure.
That was a total collaboration with visual and music people. You know, Andy was doing the choreography, and then you know, of course, Richard. But this was also 22 years ago, so bear with me.
I know. I'm making you do it way back.
I do remember that because I really loved that part of the show, and that was just almost like we wanted to create kind of a whack-a-mole type of a video game, if you will, where different people would pop up, and it wasn't just horn players, but also guard members as well. And so we used the the leveling, the verticality of it, where everyone was sitting down, and then you'd see someone stand up, and it was just kind of random. And then the brass staff would say, "Okay, you play a solo there," and it ended up being almost comical. There was kind of a tongue-in-cheek to it when all was said and done. But that was experimented with, on site for sure. I set them up. They had their coordinates or whatever. But then it was about picking the right people to do the different solos. And I know to this day, members who were in that corps complain about their knees because it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to spin up and then spin back down the way they did. And they were rock stars.
Okay, well, I just want to go on record as saying that that's one of my favorite Michael Gaines moments, and I know you weren't the only one that was part of that, but it was so fresh and new and amazing, and I thought about it when I said I want to talk to Michael Gaines. So, one last question, then we'll wrap this up. But we have this great question. Let me get back from Dan Marson. Hey, Dan, thanks for watching. How do you define success at the end of a season?
I guess there's a couple different perspectives on that. Success for the group, success for myself, they can be intertwined as well. I would start with the success for the group is that the members had a great experience and they loved performing. And I said, that sounds really simple and maybe cheesy, but it goes back to what we were talking about before, especially with the younger kids. They have to be able to achieve what it is you're asking of them. It's okay to challenge them for sure. But, I think that if you get to the end of the season and you see the performers are still excited to perform their show, you see the bonds that they've created, that season has been a success. If you're talking about competitive success, that's a whole other animal. But I think in terms of the priority for most organizations, I would think success is definitely about the member experience and the members falling in love with what it is that they're doing and each other.
Okay, and then obviously that makes you feel like it was successful because you're seeing the success that they're having and how they're feeling the experience they're having.
Nothing is better than seeing a group of performers just loving what it is that they're doing out there and knowing that you had a hand in helping them achieve that.
That's fantastic. Well, we have to start wrapping this up. Mary and Jonathan, I'm going to ask each of you to ask one final question or make one final comment or anything you want to say to Michael or anybody that might be watching. If you're watching this tonight, everybody, thank you so much. The recording is always up. If you're watching this on YouTube, I hope that you'll subscribe either at the Marching Roundtable or my new Call Me Beast channel. And I hope you'll let people know that this is happening. By the way, in 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about Paramount Winter Guard with Rick Subel and Andrea Forch are going to be here, and we're going to do the same kind of thing. And I'm so excited to talk to them. So it's really going to be all about Winter Guard for that one. And so stay tuned for that. You can find the schedule for all the stuff at marchingartseducation.com. So Mary, what would you like to say in closing?
Well, Tim, first of all, I'm so excited we're in our genius era here with the folks that we're having on here because I learned so much. And one thing I wanted to say that is really important, and I think you've brought it up a number of times in all kinds of different ways, Michael, is that it's all about a process and it always includes learning. You're never not learning something. You're always taking your process through learning somewhere. It just doesn't, like sometimes it may pop into your head in the shower, but it's always based on previous learning or new learning or want to learn. And I think that is so important is that designers and myself included are constantly in that adult learning phase. Mm-hmm. And I really so appreciate the process for sure.
Yeah, it's great. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
Just real quickly, Michael, I think that you are definitely in the upper echelon of the greatest drill designers that our activity has ever seen. And I don't say that loosely, but I wanted to sort of just put this on you just to maybe think about what inspires you. I know because like for me, you're the well I keep going back to, right? And being inspired by and designers like yourself. But what about yourself? How do you stay inspired? How do you reinvent yourself as you've done this over the course of, the last quarter century?
Great.
That's a great question. I think part of it goes to what I was talking about earlier, where to keep myself from getting bored with the process, I try to give myself different challenges. And when I say myself and obviously whomever I'm working with, in collaborating with, that's a big part of it. But also I think, as the last segment, I suppose, of my career, I've also found myself looking elsewhere outside of the activity quite a bit more. Any sort of live performance of any kind, and just watching how performers create the magic they do, and watching the audience reaction. I'm a big studier, I suppose, of audience reaction. In fact, I love to go sit in the stands behind people that have no idea I'm associated with any group or whatever, and just listening to what they say about that particular show or performance, because that's when you get the honest opinions, right? And just keep soaking that kind of a thing, watching how, whether it's a Broadway play or some strange performance art thing, just watching how it impacts people, and then try to figure out if there's a way to bring some of that into this craziness that we do.
I love it. And Michael, again, thank you so much for agreeing to talk with us tonight. I hope you've had a good time. It's been a lot of fun. As I mentioned, in 2 weeks, Andrea and Rick are going to be here from Paramount. And then later in April, Michael Rafer has agreed to talk with us. So we're watching for that. And if you didn't see our conversation with Scott Chandler, you can find that on the Call Me Beast Facebook channel. And he was wonderful and exciting. And I asked him about all kinds of shows and this and that. And I really made him think back, but that was super fun. So thank you to Scott for agreeing to do that. And if you have ideas for who you'd like to see us talk to, send me a note and let me know. Michael, what would you like to say in closing? Anything you want to say as we're finishing this?
Oh, no, just thank you for having me. I really appreciate the invitation, and I love what it is that you all do. I watched the one you did with Scott. He was great, of course. You all were great. Yeah, I think it's a great series. I'm going to be watching every one of them.
Well, it's awesome. Thank you for agreeing to be here. Thank you, everybody who watched. Sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions, but so appreciate it. Michael, you were absolutely wonderful. I had such a good time. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everybody.